G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Looking north along the power line easement for the 132,000 volt line that runs from Armidale to Tenterfield. Turn that back around and you've got the view across my southern boundary fence onto my neighbour's place, the bee farmer. Right. Now the topic for today's little bit of a walk and talk I thought could be drugs, law enforcement, social and economic decay. And I think they're kind of tied in because of an all-encompassing priority being placed on the economy. We find that children are emerging from the adolescent pipeline with not enough parenting, not enough caring, having been put into their adolescence, their childhood, their infancy. Let's face it, if you're pursuing the double income fat mortgage fantasy, have you got time to have a regular loving carer available to lock eyes with a baby 38 times per minute the baby's awake for the first 3.5 years? Pretty hard to see how you can do that, isn't it? Stick the kid in long stay daycare, then preschool, then kindergarten, the school system. Parents have got priorities that involve doing what their boss says has to happen, and if the parents are in business for himself, every customer who walks in through the door is the boss. Pretty much unless the parent takes the child along to their workplace, they're not in a position to provide the continuity of the care in order to build the infant's self-esteem so that you get a happy, well-rounded, emotionally mature individual going off to kindergarten. And I'm pretty sure the Americans have done studies on this and proved it with children from double income families who send them off to long stay daycare when they're supposed to be being breastfed, compared with children from single parent unemployed families where the teenager, generally a teenager, but the single parent concerned is perfectly delighted to spend their lifetime ensuring that their offspring, or the child with which they're entrusted, gets a good, happy start to their life. Now, funny thing is, what happens in infancy and childhood has a great bearing on what goes on in adult life, because the limbic system of the brain, the emotional response system, it's hardwired by age 3. So your cerebral hemispheres might not finish growing and hardwiring till you're 25, but that's just what you think with. What you feel with is hardwired by 3. So what happens to you when you're 2 is vitally important, because it doesn't matter what you think about the facts. What matters is how you feel about it, because that determines what your reaction is going to be. And your emotional reaction apparently determines what facts you take notice of, as well as how you react to them. One comment I heard was that you can either put the work in when the baby is a baby, the infant is an infant, the child is a child, and you wind up building a personality sort of like a multi-story building, and it's got a solid foundation. Whereas if you don't put the foundation in, you can construct what looks like a solid building, but it's unstable given the stress from wind, high rainfall, low rainfall, crack in the soil, earthquake maybe. Your unstable multi-storey building with no foundation, it'll fall down big time. And although it is possible to dig under your multi-storey building and underpin it and rebuild the foundations afterwards, it's a lot more complicated and costly and difficult than if you just done the job right in the first place. So, working up a society based on the theory that it's perfectly okay to shortchange children emotionally because they're too young to vote and form opinions, and then expect that they're going to contribute happily to society later on, it's a pretty foolish idea, actually, in my opinion. Here we come to the boundary between the Endangered Species Sanctuary and the sheep farm. It's a bit stark, isn't it? Now the funny thing is, I'm running just as many rabbits on my sheep farm, my Endangered Species Sanctuary, as my neighbour is running rabbits on his sheep farm. But isn't that a brilliant example of edge effect? Okay, off across the sheep farm. Look at all the sheep shit on the ground, eh? So, if children are mistreated, if they are traumatically separated from the parents to whom they've bonded with, it does lasting damage. A classic example of this one is a bloke called Hermann Goering. When he was a fetus, Hermann's mother went back to Germany in order to have the baby in a civilised European country, and Hermann was with his mother in Germany for 3 months. And then his mother left Hermann with a household kitchen staff, or somebody like that, a domestic staff, and she went back to German Southwest Africa to be with Hermann's father, who was the commissioner for German Southwest Africa. 3 years later, the commissioner was relieved and sent back to Germany with his wife, and the little toddler, 3 years old, spotted his mother at the distance of a banquet hall for the first time in 3 years, and he recognised her. And he ran the length of the banquet hall. His mother thought, oh look, see, he's coming to give me a kiss. Not a bit of it. Little Hermann ran and grabbed a hold of her by the belt, swung off the belt, and started kicking her shins with both of his hobnail boots. He grew up arrogant, sensitive to insult, desperately seeking justification, praise, promotion, joined the army, cavalry, didn't like the First World War on a horse, so he got into the air service. Became a bit of a hero in the First World War, but there were stories that he claimed other people's victories. In the 1920s he was shot in one leg, and he was given morphine in hospital, and bang, that was it. Hermann Goering was a junkie from then on. He'd been traumatically put through maternal deprivation syndrome as a baby, and therefore when he was first exposed to opiates, which are pain relievers, that's all that opiates are good for, pain relief. Here we go, back onto the Endangered Species Sanctuary through the power line access gate. Opiates are pain relief, it's all they're good for, they're not party drugs. When Goering was, look at that, see that? That's a turning point marker, chewed by the deer to mark the limit of the safe grazing. You go out there and you get shot at. Opiates are only for pain relief. When he was busted at the end of the Second World War, the Allies picked Goering up He had 180,000 oxycodone tablets, synthetic morphine, in the 2 suitcases that he was carrying. No socks, no underpants, just pain relief. In 2010, on Valentine's Day, Melbourne University's School of Medicine research was reported in the Australian Medical Association Journal, and it was covered in the ABC Radio National News for about 5 or maybe 8 consecutive bulletins. And the story was that they'd studied about 2,000 survivors of child sexual assault, and they'd followed them for 20 odd years, some of them more than that, 1965 to 1985 and on to 2005, with further 5 years to collate the results. What they found was that people who'd been sexually abused as children, they had 18 times the death by suicide rate. In Australia, the suicide rate is 5 times the road toll. You get a lot of suicides out here. And if you got 18 times the rate, does that mean that you make up 95% of the suicides? Is that what happens to the survivors of child sexual assault? The other thing they found was that the survivors of child sexual assault had 48 times the background rate of death from accidental drug overdose. 48 times the accidental drug overdose death rate. Is that 98% of the accidental drug overdoses are coming from people who've allegedly survived child sexual assault? We know that 7% of child sexual assault victims grow up to become abusers. So, if you consider that all forms of opiates are pain relief, pure pain relief, nothing but pain relief, not good for anything but pain relief, let's just get on the other side of this gate. Then we accept that not everybody in society has been abused as a child, or neglected, or abandoned, or beaten to the point where they feel any need for opiates as a pain relief. Then the regularly trotted out theory put forward by the law and order enforcement community that if they are not paid to suppress the supply and use of illegal drugs, then, quote, obviously, illegal drugs will take off and overwhelm the entire population. It seemed to be the ridiculous furphy that it obviously is. Pain relief only appeals to people who are in pain. Side effect of having morphine, which is refined opium, or heroin, which is refined morphine, or pethidine, or codeine, or any of the synthetic opiates, is that you fall asleep and want to vomit. It's not a party drug. Sorry to have to inform you, it just isn't a party drug. And if the only people who want to take a pain relieving drug are the people who are in pain, then what is the rationale behind denying them their pain relief if it's going to cause them to run around breaking the law to acquire the pain relief? That's my north-east boundary marking peg, actually. So what's the point in withdrawing pain relief from the people who are in pain? Is it to demonise the victims of last generation's parenting failure so that a whole bunch of anally retentive control freaks can be kept in employment? Because that's what it looks like to me. It really is. It looks to me like a make-work scheme for people who are fundamentally psychiatrically insecure, otherwise they wouldn't be looking for employment in the security industry. And that is my back boundary gate on an old logging road. Surely the sensible thing to do would be to declare all the currently illegal drugs to be available, and then 2/3 of your cops and 2/3 of your criminal lawyers and 2/3 of your prison guards would become unemployed, so you'd have to redeploy them into childcare and geriatric care so that society would actually fulfil its obligations to the young and to the old. And you'd have to let them keep their hero suits and their fat pay packets, otherwise they would revolt in the streets, wouldn't they? Hey? The muscle-brown buffheads who want to be paid to demonise the victims of last generation's parental failure. Reality is for people who can't handle their drugs. Ciao.